I finally said, okay, I can't pass up this opportunity with DOE, with Idaho National Lab.
Yeah.
They were starting to recognize like the work of a labor economist, the work of workforce development forecasting, how that impacts their ability to do their job,
Yeah.
to obtain and continue to grow the laboratory is going to be really important.
Yeah.
And so they created a role for me and brought me back to the lab.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's really neat. I'm sorry you couldn't stay in Salt Lake long, but 6 months is, I mean, you probably got a little bit of exposure down there and saw what it was about. But
yeah.
So you flew back up to Idaho Falls, sounds like, and
Yep.
then what was if you could have, I mean, use the OKR's methodology, like objectives and key results. What was your first year? Like, what was your mission? What were your objectives and key results?
At INL.
Yeah.
To author the methodology for INL's workforce forecast,
Okay.
which we publish annually now and have been for 5 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that is trying to serve all the management there in terms of, help me understand it, placement opportunities or like.
So it's kind of like this really nice, like I was alluding to earlier. If you only have historical data, there's stuff missing, right? You asked
Yep.
a really pertinent question about BLS's work.
Yeah.
And so being able to shrink that down to a company size, you can fill in a lot of those gaps. So the main impetus for doing this was actually not internal, right? I think, you ask a hiring manager at INL who they need and what they need, they'll tell you. And they're working towards that. It was actually for our external partners. So being the 5th largest employer in Idaho, we get a lot of questions from our universities, our community colleges, our legislature, our governor's office. They want to know, how do you keep Idahoans here and doing the jobs that are already in Idaho for Idaho employers? And so there are almost 6,400 INL employees now. And everybody had their own answer as to what INL needs. So depending on who was at whatever restaurant in downtown Idaho Falls at that time, right, the community college president was getting a different answer than, the university president was, etc. So the main driver was essentially to be able to answer that question from a holistic perspective and give enough detail that those education partners, those legislators, etc., knew exactly what we meant when we said this is what INL's workforce needs are.
Yeah. So they could prepare better. They can, from high schools and community colleges, universities there, even transitioning military.
Yep.
What were some takeaways? What were some things that you all learned that were surprising?
Surprising, I wouldn't say as much if you pay attention to labor economics, but of course the lab's role is to research and development. And that has always been, since it's been INL, and before that, the role is to do research and development primarily on nuclear energy, but lots of other advanced energy and national and homeland security focus areas. But in that, we have focused a lot of our recruitment efforts, certain areas of the workforce. In particular, a lot of time with grad fellows, PhD students, people who have 30 years worth of experience in the nuclear field. And what these projections, especially the first year, kind of highlighted is that, yes, those people are incredibly important and they're hard to find and there aren't that many of them. And we need to continue to put effort into recruiting them. But almost equally as important is our technicians, our workforce tradespeople, our facility service people, those types of roles, because the labor market has been tightening for so long. I think historically we've just been able to kind of pick those people up locally and train them into their roles, and that's worked out just fine. But with the tight labor market, right, just like everybody else, we're suffering from not having that access anymore.
Yeah.
And so really for the last handful of years, we've been ramping up these other priorities, which is where community colleges really came into focus over the last handful of years for the laboratory. Extended partnerships with all of our craft suppliers, our union partners, those types of training entities, and being able to bring all those people to the table and have those conversations for the first time in a long time, that workforce projection work really kind of set us up to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much there. I assume that you're in your 5th year now with that?
Just published 5 years. Yeah,
we should back up. So it'd be super helpful to get an overview. I'm sure you've learned a lot more about nuclear energy than you ever thought you would.
Certainly.
Going to for being a major in economics. But yeah, what does Idaho National Labs do?
Mhm.
Like, I know there's like dozens of research areas,
Yeah.
and whatever they're called.
Yeah.
So help us understand that.
So Idaho National Laboratory is one of DOE's 17 national laboratories. INL specifically is an applied research laboratory. So we do some fundamental research in science, but the goal of INL was specifically to take that fundamental science and research, enhance it, and then apply those principles in whatever pilot, etc. Application we can. So the idea is that INL is bridging the gap between the fundamental science and commercializing those technologies. So at INL, it's this microcosm of industry partnership with those fundamental research and science roles, all kind of in the same place, which
Yeah.
is really incredible.
Yeah.
So nuclear energy has really kind of been a core, still over 50% of our mission. We do have missions in other energy sources. We're talking a lot about green hydrogen right now, batteries, you name it. And then national and homeland security, cybersecurity, industrial cybersecurity has really kind of popped up as another major priority for DOE, DOD, and INL has, really expanded our expertise and our portfolio in those areas.
And I'm familiar with, I'm sure some of the listeners are, Sandia National Labs, Los Alamos, Jefferson, the really neat one in the Bay Area that was a setting for the Star Trek movie. You hear about this?
I'm not a Trekkie,
Yes,
unfortunately, but
it was one of the newer Star Trek movies.
okay.
Which lab is that?
Berkeley? It wasn't Berkeley.
No,
Lawrence Livermore?
Lawrence Livermore.
Okay.
Yeah, so they apparently when Scotty, he's the engineer of the big Enterprise, and, he's upset because they're trying to take off, and he doesn't like some of the luggage on the ship. I'm gonna spoil the movie for you.
Okay.
To see it.
Okay.
But the background is I think it's a like atom collider thing at Lawrence Livermore. I think they have a little one. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Or it might be a fusion thing. But I don't know if those are the same thing. Fusion's different than colliding.
Yes, but
yeah. Anyways,
along the same lines.
I was getting at, like you said, there's dozen plus of these labs. And at the, I assume at the DOE and the Pentagon level, there's missions that are somewhat dictated, right? And then so you all took on industrial security recently. Is that because we don't want adversaries hacking into dams or
correct
manufacturing plants, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's interesting. So and I'm familiar, like, doesn't I know they do some refueling even for the Navy, like nuclear rods there, and
yeah, so that's kind of the basis of INL, right? It's the nuclear Navy, the training of the Navy nukes. There's stories, right, of all of the Navy guys in their white, attire, standing on the side of the road, getting on the buses to go out to the middle of nowhere. So yes, very heavy history with the Navy.
Cool. And you're the first economists at INL that you said.
First labor economist.
Yeah.
Specifically doing labor economics work. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
At 25.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Wow. So we met just today.
We did.
Because we're at this thing. So I'll give my version of where we're at for people, and then love to hear why you're here and because I was intrigued what you spoke about, because it's sort of the cross section of workforce development and labor economics and the future needs of industry. But this is the American Nuclear Society. I think this is where we're at, right? Yeah, just kidding. Conference on Training Education. So there's a lot of, most of the nuclear power station companies are represented here. So Southern Nuclear and Dominion and Constellation, et cetera. And a lot of contractors like Westinghouse, Curtiss-Wright, et cetera. And it's put on by, I can't quite figure out, American Nuclear Society, I'm a little bit familiar with, but then there's the Nuclear Energy Institute.
NEI, yep.
And I was actually invited by a friend of mine from EPRI.
Oh, yeah.
Electric Power Research Institute. He almost put this whole thing together, Chuck Leese. And, but then he couldn't come. Like, do you know him?
I don't know him, but I work with EPRI folks. But
I think there was a double booking of it. And I think there's an EPRI event this week.
Oh, okay.
That's what I ever heard about. So incredible group. And then tell us about your panel today and like what you all discussed.
So I was asked to speak with some other leaders in the industry, specifically about like just kind of the industry makeup, the forecast for what's going on, where we're headed. Ultimately, what I thought was interesting about the handful of panelists that they chose for that opening plenary session is that each of us represent a different region of the United States that has a kind of first mover status in nuclear, advanced nuclear specifically.
Yep.
And so it was a really nice cross section between, some of our historical nuclear concentrated communities.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that this morning too.
What's a historical versus that's a polite way of saying it.
Yeah, like Michigan and Georgia and some of these states have traditional nuclear power plants.
Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee,
right?
Certainly.
Yeah.
And they've been providing nuclear electrical generation to the United States for many moons.
Yeah.
Whether people in the United States know that or not.
Yeah.
And that was part of the conversation
shout out
today.
To Washington State too. They're part of the Manhattan Project.
They are,
right? So
yep.
What was it? Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
The 3 first reactors in the country. I mean, I don't know to what extent, but
yep.
They're certainly Manhattan Project.
Yep.
Cool. And then so what is advanced nuclear mean?
So when we say advanced nuclear, we just mean newer technologies or different footprints of the same exact technology, right? So we're talking about historic nuclear, these huge cement silos, right, that take up a massive amount of footprint and produce, respectively that amount of power. Small modular reactors and micro reactors has really kind of been the main focus of the advanced nuclear wave. Although in the last year, we're now talking about not just restarting historically traditional nuclear plants, but building ones that are similarly sized. So I think at all 3 layers of generation, right, that's what we're talking about is advanced nuclear, really the same technology in what I would consider to be like hyper efficient space.
Yeah.
And in different sizes so that they can be used for different things.
I've listened to friends in the industry tell me about BWRs and PWRs and XYZs, and I think there's some newer generation 4 stuff.
Oh, yes.
Like all this stuff. I've got a really good mentor who was a aerospace engineer, but then went through nuclear Navy school and had a reactor license, and it's just this whole other world that you really, I mean, it's an industry, and it's a really impressive industry. So even looking at some of the apprenticeships available with some of the utilities, it was interesting that even someone going into maintenance is going to have fundamental training on nuclear fission and fusion nuclear energy in general, all that stuff. So
safety protocols, culture, you name it.
Radiation, that stuff. Yeah.